Welcome to Michigan's WW1 Centennial News Report for January 2015. Ford pays $5 a day. I'm your host, Dennis Skupinski. Henry Ford astonished the world in January 1914 by offering $5 per day for an 8-hour workday. This more than doubled most workers' pay, plus it was a shorter day. By doing this, Henry Ford could run 3 shifts of 8 hours instead of 2 shifts at 9 or 10 hours per day, thus increasing productivity and increasing profits. Instead of the constant turnover of employees, the best mechanics flocked to Ford, bringing with them their human capital and expertise, raising productivity, lowering training costs. Ford's $5 a day was announced on January 5, 1914, raising the daily pay from $2.34 to $5 a day for qualifying workers. It also set a new reduced work week. Detroit was already becoming a high-wage city, but competitors were forced to raise their wages or lose their best workers to Ford. The new methods and techniques of production developed from 1910 to 1914 drastically altered the skills necessary for factory operations. The expansion of plant facilities to meet the growing demand of the Model T Ford employed thousands of Southern and Eastern European immigrants. They swarmed to the Highland Park factory, which opened in the fall of 1913. The Ford Motor Company employed over 12,880 workers. Overwhelming majority of these workers were foreign-born. The nationalities of the people employed at the Ford Motor Company Highland Park plant were Poles, Russians, Romanians, Italians, Sicilians, and Austro-Hungarians. The other factor to remember at the Ford Highland Park plant was they had tremendous problems with establishing a stable workforce. In 1913, Ford hired over 52,000 men to maintain a competent workforce of 14,000 workers. 6 times as many employees quit as were fired. Absentee ran as high as 10% per day. During the summer of 1914, the Great War erupted in Europe. This curtailed the flow of immigrants to the United States, depriving American industries of a traditional supply of new labor. Northern railroads and manufacturing firms like the Ford Motor Company then turned to the blacks of the South as a potential workforce to fill the unskilled jobs necessary to continue the growth and increase their profits arising from the sales of manufacturing goods to the warring nations in Europe. Just prior to America's entry into World War I, a series of economic hardships and natural disasters struck much of the South's cotton-growing regions, adversely affecting the black population living there. In July 1916, floods wiped away crops throughout the South in Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. With their crops destroyed, many black sharecroppers had no way of repaying their debts of food and provision advanced to them during the previous winter. Consequently, mules and other items of personal property were claimed for rents and debts at local stores, and many blacks were evicted from their land. Beginning in 1914, the boll weevil ravaged the cotton crops throughout the South, causing even more blacks to move away from the soil. To this deteriorating economic condition, the Southern black must add one more item: the lack of political rights, social subordination, poor educational facilities, intimidation, and segregation were all factors that helped contribute to the Great Migration. Great Northern Migration got underway in late 1915. It did not end until well after the end of the First World War. Once in the North, the black migrants entered a variety of industrial occupations. One of them was automobile manufacturing in Detroit, where the pressure of wartime needs forced the opening of automobile plants to black Americans. In 1914, there were less than 1,000 black auto workers. As a result of the migration, between 1916 and 1918, over 18,000 blacks gained employment in the automobile industry in Detroit. Thus, on the eve of America's entrance into World War I, the black industrial working class of the United States came into existence. In 1903, the present Ford Motor Company was organized. Mr. Ford owned 25.5% of the stock and held the position of vice president and factory manager. The company was capitalized for $100,000. Henry Ford soon realized that his own ideas and policies, which were very clearly defined, could not be carried out unless he should be free and control. Accordingly, in 1906, he purchased sufficient stock to bring his holdings up to 51%. A short time later, he bought another 7.5% to make his total 58.5%. The first car manufactured by the Ford Motor Company was on the road in July of 1903. 1910, Ford Motor Company opened the Highland Park plant, the second plant to manufacture the Model T. It consisted of over 120 acres of office space, manufacturing space, a power plant, and a foundry. In 1913, it started the assembly line. By using the assembly line to manufacture the Model T, Ford could reduce the time it took to manufacture the car from 728 minutes to 93 minutes. In 1910, the Model T cost $700. In 1917, it cost $350. Besides creating thousands of unskilled jobs, the Ford Motor Company also created a number of skilled positions, such as engineers for manufacturing and design. Also, it created a need for supervisors. Henry Ford had to train his own employees to do these functions. One of the more controversial aspects of Ford's $5 a day plan was that of the social department approval. In order for the employee to qualify for the $5 a day, they had to conduct their lives in a manner which was approved by Ford's social department, which frowned upon heavy drinking and gambling. Ford's inclusion into the employees' private lives was highly controversial. Henry Ford, besides revolutionizing the industrial world, also wanted to revolutionize the social world in which people lived in, and he hoped to make his changes felt by first starting with his employees. The Highland Park plant was where it all started. The Ford Motor Company's major contribution to the First World War, before America's entry into it, was that of manufacturing the Model T, which had a variety of uses, such as scout cars, which is pictured here with a machine gun. Also, they used it as an ambulance for the Allies, and they also used it as an armored car where they mounted armored plates on it with a machine gun. One of the other products that the Ford Motor Company manufactured was that of the Eagle boat. It was a submarine chaser to hunt down the German U-boats in American coastal waterways. These boats were manufactured at the future site of Ford Rouge plant, which is located in Dearborn, Michigan. Like most U.S. war products, they arrived too late to be of service to the Allies. During the summer of 2013, I drove past the Ford Highland Park plant, and these are some of the pictures that were taken. It's currently used by the Ford Motor Company for archive storage and also storage of items for the Henry Ford Museum. There are some plans to sell a couple of the buildings for a retail and entertainment complex. Over 100 years ago, this was state-of-the-art of the manufacturing industry for the automobile. On January 5, 1914, Henry Ford announced the minimum $5 salary for all eligible employees working 8-hour days. It was conceived as a profit-sharing plan which would motivate Ford employees to adopt efficient and productive habits at both the factory and at the home. To be eligible for this $5 a day bonus, Ford factory workers had to learn to do things the American way, and for the European immigrants this was learning English, and a Ford English School certificate helped the Ford employee become a U.S. citizen. It also helped the Southern black workers adapt to Detroit's culture and living in the city of Detroit. Ford also set up trade schools. Besides the school to learn English, he also set up a school for apprentices so he could have skilled workers in his factories. There was a trade school in which they trained high school boys to learn skilled trades so when they graduated they could work in his factories. There was also a service school eventually set up which helped train mechanics for service dealerships. One other novelty was Ford Healthcare. Employees at the factory were subject to medical exams so they could have dental, hearing, and vision problems corrected. If they were sick, they also had a hospital to go to and medical treatment. Henry Ford wanted to keep his workforce stable, and the only way to do this, he realized, was by providing them with medical care. A 60-piece concert band known as the Ford Motor Band was formed in 1911. Ford, besides all of his other changes to the Michigan area, also helped create an interest in music. When Henry Ford paid $5 a day for unskilled labor for an 8-hour work week, he changed the world. He changed the world of manufacturing, engineering, and the human condition. Manufacturing he changed by the introduction of the assembly line. The assembly line proved a way to produce items cheaply with unskilled labor. Engineering he changed by breaking down actions and parts into their basic elements, designing them so they'd fit on the assembly line. He changed the human condition by creating equality on the assembly line. On the assembly line, everybody was the same. He helped diversity by creating work for the Great Migration, which caused Europeans and Southern blacks to move to the Midwest. He also instituted health care for his employees in order to keep a stable workforce. People have various opinions of Henry Ford, but one thing you have to admit, he did influence the world. He also helped the United States become the largest creditor nation at the end of the First World War.
Around her waist, then the chauffeur loudly roared.